Emily Carter only meant to escape. The moment she stepped into the glittering Manhattan gala, she spotted her ex-husband Jason laughing with his new fiancée, the same cruel smile that once broke her confidence. Panic surged through her chest. Without thinking, Emily rushed to the nearest man in a tailored black suit and wrapped her arms around him. "Please, just pretend you know me," she whispered. The stranger didn't pull away. Instead, his hand settled calmly at her waist as Jason stared in confusion. Then the host grabbed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner of tonight's event, Billionaire Daniel Brooks." And Emily was still standing in his arms. Sometimes the smallest moment of panic can change the rest of your life. Emily Carter told herself she would stay for 10 minutes, smile politely, and leave before anyone important noticed her. The annual Manhattan Charity Gala glittered around her like another world, crystal chandeliers hanging above a marble ballroom, the air scented with expensive perfume and quiet power. Men in tailored tuxedos discussed deals worth millions while women in silk gowns laughed beside tables of champagne. Emily felt like an imposter standing among them. Her simple navy dress was elegant but modest, the kind of dress someone wears when they want to disappear into the background. And tonight, disappearing was exactly what she hoped to do. She kept her eyes on the polished floor as she walked past a row of tall windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Outside, yellow cabs crawled through evening traffic, their headlights glowing like a distant river of light. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe. Maybe Jason wouldn't come tonight. Maybe the universe would give her one small break. Then she heard it. That laugh. Deep, confident, unmistakable. Her heart seized. Slowly, against her better judgment, Emily lifted her eyes across the ballroom. There he was. Jason Carter stood near the bar, looking exactly the same as the day he walked out of their marriage 2 years earlier. Perfectly tailored suit. Perfect smile. Perfect confidence. Only now his arm rested casually around the waist of a tall blonde woman in a shimmering silver gown. His fiancée, if the rumors were true. Emily felt the old familiar knot tighten in her stomach. For years Jason had made her feel small, as if she were an accessory to his ambitions instead of a person, with dreams of her own. Even after the divorce, the memory of that feeling still lingered like a shadow. She turned quickly, hoping to escape before he noticed her. But fate had other plans. Jason's eyes lifted across the room, scanning the crowd, and then they landed directly on her. Recognition flickered instantly. The slow smile that followed made Emily's pulse race. He was already walking toward her. Panic surged through her chest, fast and irrational. She needed an exit, a distraction, anything to avoid the inevitable conversation filled with polite cruelty and subtle humiliation. Her gaze darted around the room. And then she saw him. A tall man stood a few feet away near one of the marble columns, his back partially turned as he checked something on his phone. His suit was perfectly cut, black against the soft gold light of the ballroom, his posture calm and effortless like someone completely comfortable in this world. Emily didn't think. She simply moved. In 3 quick steps, she crossed the distance, wrapped her arms around the stranger, and pressed close as if greeting an old friend. "Please," she whispered under her breath, her voice trembling. "Just pretend you know me." For a split second the man froze in surprise. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of pulling away, his arm lifted and rested gently around her shoulders, steady and protective. Across the room Jason Carter stopped walking, confusion flashing across his face as he watched the scene unfold. Emily slowly lifted her head, mortified by what she had done, ready to apologize and disappear. But when she finally looked at the stranger's face, the calm confidence in his dark eyes made her pause. Because the way he looked at her was not annoyance. It was curiosity, and neither of them realized yet that the entire room was about to hear his name. Emily felt the stranger's arm rest lightly around her shoulders, steady and calm, as if comforting a nervous friend instead of a woman who had just invaded his personal space without warning. The warmth of that simple gesture slowed the frantic pounding in her chest, but embarrassment rushed in just as quickly. She pulled back a few inches, her face flushing beneath the soft golden light of the ballroom. "I am so sorry," she whispered quickly. "I should not have done that. I just needed a moment." The man studied her with quiet curiosity rather than annoyance. Up close, she noticed details she had missed in her panic. His dark hair was neatly styled, his suit tailored with effortless precision, and there was a calm confidence in his posture that felt different from the loud ambition she associated with men like Jason. His voice, when he spoke, was low and composed. "You look like you needed help." Emily blinked in surprise. "Most people would have pushed me away." A faint smile touched his lips. "Most people would have asked questions first." Across the room, Jason Carter had slowed his approach, clearly confused by what he was seeing. Emily could feel his eyes on her like a spotlight she could not escape. Jason prided himself on control, on always understanding the room and the people inside it. Right now, for the first time in years, he looked uncertain. Emily swallowed and lowered her voice again. "That man walking toward us is my ex-husband." The stranger glanced briefly past her shoulder, his gaze calm as he observed Jason without any visible reaction. "And I assume you would rather not speak with him tonight." "That would be the dream." The man nodded once, as if accepting a simple business proposal. His arm remained around her shoulders, natural and unforced, the way a partner might stand beside someone they cared about. Jason stopped a few feet away, his expression carefully polite but edged with suspicion. His fiancée lingered behind him, her silver dress catching the light as she studied Emily with open curiosity. Jason forced a small laugh. "Emily, I did not expect to see you here tonight." Emily felt the familiar pressure of his presence, the old instinct to shrink and apologize. But the stranger beside her did not move. His quiet steadiness felt like an invisible shield. She lifted her chin slightly. "Good evening, Jason." Jason's eyes shifted toward the man standing beside her. "And you are?" The stranger extended his hand with calm confidence. "Daniel." Jason shook it automatically, though his gaze narrowed slightly as he studied the man's face, clearly trying to place him among the city's endless network of investors and executives. "Daniel," Jason repeated slowly. "And how do you two know each other?" Emily opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first, his voice smooth and effortless. "We met earlier this evening." Jason gave a skeptical smile. "Small world." Before Emily could respond, a sudden burst of applause echoed through the ballroom. A man near the stage tapped a microphone, his voice rising above the low hum of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The entire room gradually quieted, heads turning toward the stage beneath the towering crystal chandelier. Emily felt Daniel's arm gently lower from her shoulders as he straightened slightly beside her. "Tonight," the announcer continued warmly, "we would like to welcome the man whose generosity made this entire event possible." A pause stretched across the silent ballroom. "Please join me in welcoming the host of tonight's gala, the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Capital, Mr. Daniel Brooks." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Emily turned slowly toward the man beside her, the name echoing in her mind like distant thunder. Around them, the room erupted into applause. And Jason Carter's expression changed completely. The applause rolled across the ballroom like a rising tide, filling the vast marble hall beneath the glittering chandeliers, and Emily Carter felt as if the air had suddenly grown thinner. For a brief second, she wondered if she had heard the name wrong, if perhaps the microphone had distorted the sound. But the reaction of the room made the truth unmistakable. Executives, investors, and socialites were already turning toward the man beside her with admiration and recognition, their applause growing louder as the realization spread through the crowd. Daniel Brooks. The name echoed in her mind with quiet disbelief. She had heard it before, of course. Anyone who followed business news in New York had. Brooks Capital had financed some of the largest real estate and technology expansions on the East Coast over the past decade. The company was known for bold investments and a leader whose influence reached far beyond Wall Street. And a moment ago, she had thrown her arms around him like a stranger in a grocery store. Slowly, Daniel turned toward her, the same calm expression in his eyes, as if the entire ballroom, celebrating his name, was nothing more than background noise. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and Emily saw a hint of quiet amusement there, not arrogance, not irritation, simply curiosity. Then Daniel gave her a small, reassuring nod before stepping forward. The crowd parted naturally as he walked toward the stage, the way water parts around a passing boat. Emily remained where she stood, her mind racing as she watched him move confidently through the elegant sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Jason Carter had not moved. His expression had changed in a way Emily had never seen before. The confident smile that usually defined him had disappeared, replaced by a rigid stillness that betrayed genuine surprise. Jason glanced from the stage back to Emily, as if recalculating something in his mind. His fiancée leaned closer to him and whispered something, clearly impressed by the name that had just been announced. Emily could almost see the shift happening inside Jason's thoughts. For years he had treated her like someone who would always exist on the edges of his world, someone predictable and small. Now the situation in front of him did not fit that narrative anymore. Daniel reached the stage and accepted the microphone from the announcer with an easy professionalism. The applause gradually softened into a respectful quiet as he looked out across the ballroom, filled with New York's wealthiest and most influential guests. His voice carried clearly through the speakers, calm and confident. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Events like this remind us that real change often begins in rooms exactly like this one. Emily listened, still stunned by the strange chain of events that had brought her to this moment. Only minutes ago she had been trying to hide in the background. Now she was standing in the center of a story she never expected to be part of. Daniel spoke briefly about the charity foundation the gala was supporting, thanking donors and guests with quiet sincerity. But as he finished his remarks and prepared to step away from the microphone, something unexpected happened. Instead of leaving the stage immediately, Daniel's gaze moved slowly across the ballroom. For a brief moment his eyes found Emily again. The room remained silent, waiting. Daniel smiled slightly, as if remembering something private. And then he said something that made Jason Carter's entire posture stiffen where he stood. The ballroom remained silent for a heartbeat after Daniel Brooks paused at the microphone, his gaze drifting calmly across the crowd as if searching for something specific among the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Emily Carter felt a strange flutter in her chest when his eyes found her again across the polished marble floor. It was not an obvious look, not dramatic enough for most people to notice, but it was unmistakable to her. The faint smile that touched his expression carried the quiet confidence of someone who understood exactly what was happening in the room. Jason Carter followed Daniel's gaze almost immediately. Emily saw the shift in her ex-husband's face. The way his eyes narrowed slightly as he realized that the billionaire on stage was looking directly toward the woman he had just approached minutes earlier. Jason straightened his posture unconsciously, the polished businessman inside him suddenly alert. His fiancée glanced between the stage and Emily, curiosity flickering in her eyes as if she sensed the invisible thread connecting the moment. Daniel adjusted the microphone slightly, the soft sound echoing through the ballroom speakers. His voice, when he spoke again, carried easily through the vast room, calm and measured. Before we continue with the evening, he said thoughtfully, I would like to acknowledge someone who helped me remember something important tonight. A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Several guests exchanged puzzled glances, clearly wondering who the powerful host might be referring to. Daniel's eyes briefly returned to Emily again, and this time the hint of amusement in them was impossible to miss. Sometimes, he continued, in a room full of people who are perfectly comfortable, it takes one unexpected moment to remind you what courage actually looks like. Emily felt her pulse quicken as whispers began to spread softly through the surrounding guests. She had no idea what Daniel was about to say, but somehow she felt certain that she was part of the reason. Jason's attention sharpened instantly. He looked back at Emily again, studying her more carefully now as if trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become much more complicated than he expected. Daniel lowered the microphone slightly and nodded toward the center of the ballroom. A few minutes ago, he said, someone walked up to me and asked for help in the most honest way possible. The guests nearest Emily turned their heads instinctively, scanning the room for whoever he might be describing. Emily felt the warmth rise in her cheeks, realizing that several curious eyes had already settled on her. Daniel continued with the same calm sincerity. She did not know who I was, and she did not care. She only knew that she needed someone to stand beside her for a moment. The whispers around Emily grew louder now, curiosity spreading like a quiet breeze through the elegant crowd. Jason's expression tightened slightly as understanding began to form. Daniel finally smiled fully, the kind of confident smile that could fill a room without raising his voice. And in a city where people are often too careful, too guarded, That kind of honesty is rare. He paused briefly before adding one final sentence that caused several people near Emily to turn directly toward her. So tonight, I would like to thank the woman who reminded me of that. The room shifted subtly as attention gathered around Emily Carter, and for the first time in years Jason Carter looked at his former wife with something very close to genuine uncertainty. Emily Carter felt the weight of the entire ballroom settle around her like a sudden spotlight she never asked for. The quiet murmurs drifting through the crowd grew louder as more guests turned their attention toward the woman standing near the marble column in the navy blue dress. A few people whispered to each other, clearly trying to connect the story Daniel Brooks had just told with the person now standing at the center of their curiosity. Emily's first instinct was the same one she had learned during years of marriage to Jason Carter. Stay quiet. Stay small. Avoid attention. But tonight the moment had already escaped her control. Across the ballroom, Daniel Brooks stepped away from the microphone, handing it back to the event host with an easy nod. Applause rose again, polite and warm, but the atmosphere had changed in a subtle way. The story he had shared had turned a room full of powerful strangers into witnesses of a quiet moment they had not seen. And now many of them were looking directly at her. Jason Carter's gaze had not moved. He watched Emily carefully, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and calculation. The woman standing beside him, elegant in silver, leaned slightly toward him and spoke softly under her breath. Emily could not hear the words, but she saw Jason shake his head almost immediately, as if dismissing whatever assumption had just been made. That reaction alone made something inside Emily shift. For years, Jason had always been the one controlling every conversation, every room, every narrative about who she was. Yet tonight he looked uncertain in a way she had never seen before. The quiet ripple of conversation continued around her until a new voice interrupted it. Emily. The sound of her name was calm and familiar now. She turned slowly and found Daniel Brooks standing beside her again. She had not even noticed him crossing the ballroom. Up close, his presence felt even more composed than before. Not intimidating, not showy, simply steady. I hope you do not mind, he said with a slight smile. I did not mean to embarrass you. Emily exhaled softly, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few minutes. You did not embarrass me, she replied honestly. You surprised me. Daniel's expression warmed slightly. That makes two of us. For a moment neither of them spoke. The elegant music of the live orchestra resumed somewhere near the stage, filling the ballroom with a smooth melody that softened the tension of the earlier announcement. Guests began drifting back toward their conversations, though a few curious glances still lingered toward Emily. Daniel followed her gaze briefly toward Jason Carter. Your ex-husband seems very interested in the situation, he observed quietly. Emily gave a small, rueful smile. Jason is always interested in anything he does not understand. Daniel studied her face for a second longer, thoughtful. And do you understand what just happened tonight? Emily shook her head honestly. Not even a little. Daniel's smile returned, calm and slightly mysterious. Then perhaps, he said gently, we should start with something simple. He gestured toward the wide glass doors leading to a terrace overlooking the Manhattan skyline, where the lights of the city stretched for miles into the night. Would you like to step outside for some fresh air? Emily hesitated only for a moment before nodding. As they began walking toward the terrace together, Jason Carter watched from across the ballroom with an expression that no longer looked confident at all. The night air on the terrace felt cooler, carrying the distant hum of Manhattan traffic far below the hotel ballroom. Emily Carter stepped outside beside Daniel Brooks, and for the first time since arriving that evening, she felt her lungs fill with a full, steady breath. The terrace stretched wide along the building, lined with soft golden lights and tall glass railings that revealed the endless skyline of New York City. Yellow taxi lights flowed through the streets 20 stories below like slow-moving rivers. For a moment neither of them spoke. Emily rested her hands lightly on the cool glass railing and looked out across the city she had lived in her entire life. Yet tonight it somehow felt different. Behind them the muted music from the orchestra drifted through the open doors, a gentle background to the quiet space outside. Daniel Brooks stood beside her, relaxed but observant, giving her the rare gift of silence instead of filling the moment with polite conversation. Emily finally laughed softly, almost in disbelief. I still cannot believe I hugged one of the most powerful investors in New York without knowing it. Daniel's smile was calm and easy. It happens more often than you would think. Emily glanced sideways at him with raised eyebrows. I doubt that. Daniel leaned lightly against the railing beside her. His posture relaxed, as if the entire evening had never been stressful at all. Most people who approach me at events like this want something. Business connections, funding, influence. It is rare for someone to approach me simply because they needed help. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, remembering the panic that had driven her across the ballroom only minutes earlier. I was not exactly thinking clearly. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most honest decisions are the ones made without thinking. The city lights reflected in the glass behind them, painting soft reflections across his dark suit. Emily studied him quietly now that the chaos of the ballroom was behind them. Daniel Brooks did not carry the aggressive confidence she had learned to associate with powerful men. There was no need for him to dominate a conversation or prove his status. His presence felt steady instead of overwhelming. That difference alone unsettled her expectations. You handled Jason very calmly, she said after a moment. Daniel glanced toward the ballroom doors where silhouettes of guests moved beyond the glass. Your ex-husband? Emily nodded slightly. Jason usually enjoys controlling every situation. Tonight might have been the first time I have seen him unsure of himself. Daniel's expression remained thoughtful. Confidence built on control tends to fade when something unexpected appears. Emily considered that quietly. For years, Jason had built his career and his reputation on the idea that he understood every room he entered. Tonight, the rules of that world had shifted in a way he could not immediately predict. Emily looked back out at the skyline again. Thank you, she said softly. Daniel turned toward her. For what? For standing beside me back there. Daniel's response came without hesitation. You asked for help. That seemed reason enough. For a moment, they both stood quietly again as the wind moved gently across the terrace. Then Daniel spoke once more, his tone thoughtful but curious. Emily, may I ask you something? She nodded. When you walked up to me tonight, what made you believe I would help you? Emily smiled faintly, remembering the exact moment that had changed the direction of her entire evening. Honestly, Daniel nodded. You look like the only person in the room who was not trying to impress anyone. Daniel laughed quietly at that answer. And inside the ballroom behind them, Jason Carter had just decided he was not finished with the conversation yet. Emily Carter's answer lingered between them for a moment, carried softly by the cool night breeze drifting across the terrace. Daniel Brooks let out a quiet laugh, not the loud, confident kind she had grown used to hearing from men like Jason, but something genuine and warm. The sound surprised her more than anything that had happened inside the ballroom. That might be the most honest observation anyone has made about me at one of these events, Daniel said. Emily shrugged slightly, her fingers still resting on the smooth glass railing. Everyone inside looked like they were performing for someone. Investors, executives, social climbers. You looked like you were just waiting for the night to be over. Daniel glanced back toward the glowing ballroom doors where silhouettes moved behind the glass like figures in a painting. You are not entirely wrong, he admitted. Events like this are necessary, but they are rarely honest. Emily studied him for a second longer. She had expected someone in Daniel Brooks's position to carry an intimidating presence, something sharp and commanding. Instead, there was a quiet steadiness about him that made the conversation feel unexpectedly easy. For a moment, she almost forgot the complicated reason she had run across the ballroom earlier. Almost. The terrace doors opened behind them with a soft mechanical sound. Emily did not need to turn around to know who had stepped outside. She recognized the measured confidence of Jason Carter's footsteps even after 2 years apart. Some habits never left the memory. Daniel noticed the subtle change in Emily's posture immediately. His eyes lifted toward the reflection in the glass railing where Jason's figure approached from behind them. I assume this conversation is about to become less peaceful, Daniel said quietly. Emily exhaled slowly. Jason does not like unfinished business. Jason Carter stopped a few feet away, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, as if he had simply stepped outside for fresh air. His expression had returned to the composed confidence Emily remembered so well, but there was something slightly tighter in his eyes now. Something calculating. Emily, Jason said smoothly. as though they had run into each other at a quiet coffee shop instead of a high-profile charity gala. "I was wondering where you disappeared to." Emily turned slowly to face him, her expression calm even though she could feel the familiar pressure of his presence trying to pull her back into old habits. Daniel remained beside her without moving, his relaxed posture unchanged. Jason's attention shifted toward him immediately. "Mr. Brooks," Jason said, extending his hand with the polished professionalism of a man used to networking with powerful figures. "Jason Carter, I do not believe we have been properly introduced." Daniel shook his hand once, firm but brief. "Daniel Brooks." Jason gave a polite smile, but his eyes flickered briefly toward Emily again. "It seems you and my former wife have already become acquainted." The subtle emphasis on those words did not go unnoticed. Emily had heard that tone many times during their marriage. The quiet suggestion that she was someone who needed explanation. Daniel glanced at Emily for a fraction of a second before answering. "Yes," he said calmly. "We met earlier this evening." Jason nodded slowly, as if processing the information while building his next move. The city lights reflected across the glass railing between them, illuminating the tension that had quietly formed in the cool night air. "Emily always had a talent for surprising people," Jason said lightly. "Though I must admit, this particular situation is unexpected even for her." Emily held his gaze now without flinching. For the first time in years, Jason Carter did not seem completely certain how the conversation would end. The night air on the terrace had grown noticeably quieter, as if even the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic had paused to watch the silent tension forming between the three people standing beneath the city lights. Emily Carter held Jason's gaze steadily, something she had rarely done during the years of their marriage. In the past, she would have filled the silence with explanations or apologies, trying to smooth over the invisible pressure Jason always carried into conversations. Tonight, she simply waited. Jason noticed the difference immediately. The faint confidence that had returned to his posture shifted slightly, his expression sharpening as he studied her more carefully. For a moment, he seemed less interested in Daniel Brooks and more interested in the unexpected change in the woman standing in front of him. "You look different tonight," Jason said casually, though the observation carried a hint of curiosity. Emily lifted one shoulder in a small shrug. "It has been 2 years." Jason nodded slowly, as if measuring those words against his own expectations. "Time changes people," he said. His eyes drifted briefly toward Daniel before returning to Emily again. "Although I must admit, I did not expect your evening to involve the host of the event." Daniel remained relaxed beside her, leaning lightly against the glass railing with the quiet patience of someone accustomed to watching negotiations unfold. He did not interrupt. He simply observed. Emily noticed that calm presence beside her and felt the steady reassurance it provided. Jason continued speaking, his tone smooth but probing. "When we spoke last month about the property documents, you mentioned work had been keeping you busy. You never mentioned attending events like this." Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "You did not ask." That simple answer hung in the air between them. Jason's expression flickered almost imperceptibly before settling again into the composed professionalism that had always defined him. "Fair enough," he said. "Still, New York is a small world. Situations like this tend to draw attention." His eyes moved once more toward Daniel Brooks. "Especially when someone as influential as Mr. Brooks becomes involved." Daniel straightened slightly then, his expression still calm, but no longer entirely neutral. "Involved might be a strong word," he said evenly. "Emily asked for help earlier. I happened to be standing nearby." Jason studied him for a moment, as if evaluating a business rival across a conference table. "You are known for making very strategic decisions, Mr. Brooks," Jason replied politely. "I imagine. You rarely involve yourself in situations without a reason." Daniel's response came without hesitation. "Sometimes the reason is simply that someone needed support." The simplicity of that statement shifted the energy of the conversation again. Jason exhaled quietly through his nose, clearly aware that the direction he had hoped to guide the exchange was no longer entirely under his control. For years he had been the one steering every dialogue, every room, every outcome. Tonight something subtle had changed. Emily could see the realization forming behind his carefully controlled expression. Daniel Brooks was not reacting the way Jason expected powerful men to react. He was not competing, not posturing. not attempting to dominate the moment. That absence of predictable behavior made Jason's usual strategies less effective. Emily realized something else as well. For the first time since their divorce, she was not waiting for Jason's approval or fearing his judgment. The skyline stretched endlessly behind them, thousands of glowing windows scattered across the night like quiet witnesses. Jason adjusted his jacket again, his voice calm, but slightly firmer now. "Well," he said slowly, "it seems the evening has become far more interesting than I anticipated." Emily allowed herself a small, calm smile. And for the first time Jason Carter could not tell whether that smile was meant for him or for the man standing beside her. The small smile on Emily Carter's face lingered only for a moment, but Jason Carter noticed it immediately. During the years of their marriage, he had learned to read every shift in her expression, every hesitation, every quiet reaction. That was how he had always stayed one step ahead in every argument and every decision. Tonight, that familiar advantage felt less certain. The wind moved softly across the terrace, brushing the edge of Emily's dark hair as the city lights stretched endlessly behind her. Jason studied her with a new kind of attention, the analytical focus he normally reserved for complicated business negotiations. Something about the situation refused to fit into the expectations he had carried into the evening. Daniel Brooks remained beside Emily, his calm posture unchanged as he watched the exchange with quiet patience. He did not step forward or dominate the conversation, yet his presence filled the space with an unmistakable steadiness that altered the entire dynamic of the moment. Jason cleared his throat lightly, returning his attention to Daniel with the polished professionalism that had helped build his career. "I have followed Brooks Capital's expansion over the past few years," Jason said. "Your firm has been responsible for some very impressive acquisitions." Daniel nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you." Jason continued smoothly, though his eyes flickered briefly toward Emily again. "Your approach to investment strategy has changed several sectors across the city. Many people in finance consider your timing almost instinctive." Daniel's expression remained thoughtful rather than flattered. "Markets reward patience more often than instinct," he replied calmly. Jason gave a polite laugh. "Perhaps. Still, success on that level usually requires recognizing opportunities before others see them." The subtle implication in Jason's words did not go unnoticed. Emily understood the tone immediately. Jason was not simply making conversation. He was probing for information, testing the boundaries of the situation the way he always did when he sensed uncertainty. Daniel seemed to recognize the same strategy. He glanced briefly toward the glowing skyline before answering. "Opportunities appear in many forms," he said evenly. "Sometimes they arrive through careful planning. Sometimes they appear unexpectedly." Jason's gaze shifted toward Emily again. "Unexpected opportunities can be risky," he said, "especially when they appear without warning." Emily met his eyes calmly now, refusing to step backward into the familiar pattern of defensive explanations. "Not everything unexpected is a problem, Jason," she replied. For a brief second silence settled between them again. Jason studied her expression as if searching for something he had not anticipated. 2 years earlier Emily would have avoided contradicting him so directly, especially in front of someone else. Tonight, she held his gaze without hesitation. Daniel noticed the shift as well. His voice remained calm when he spoke again. Change tends to reveal new perspectives. Jason nodded slowly, though the subtle tightening of his jaw suggested the comment had landed more sharply than the calm tone suggested. The lights of passing helicopters blinked faintly in the distance above the skyline as the terrace remained suspended between the quiet hum of the city and the music drifting from the ballroom behind them. Jason finally slipped his hands into the pockets of his tailored jacket. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "it appears tonight has created several unexpected perspectives." His eyes moved between Emily and Daniel again. "And I have always believed that unexpected situations deserve careful attention." Emily recognized that tone immediately. It was the same tone Jason used whenever he began planning his next move. But tonight something was different. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she was standing alone across the chessboard from him. The quiet tension on the terrace stretched for another moment after Jason Carter's last words faded into the cool night air. Emily Carter noticed the way his mind was clearly working behind his composed expression. Jason had always approached life the same way he approached business negotiations. Every conversation was a strategy. Every silence was an opportunity to calculate the next move. But tonight the situation refused to settle into any pattern he could easily control. The city lights shimmered across the glass railing, reflecting thousands of windows from the towering buildings surrounding them. Daniel Brooks remained calm beside Emily, his posture relaxed yet attentive as if he had already understood the direction Jason's thoughts were moving. Jason finally shifted his weight slightly, glancing back toward the ballroom doors where the warm glow of chandeliers illuminated the crowd inside. The music from the orchestra drifted faintly into the open terrace, a smooth melody that contrasted sharply with the careful tension standing between the three of them. Jason returned his attention to Daniel. "I imagine hosting events like this requires a remarkable amount of planning," he said conversationally. "Coordinating investors, donors, public figures. That kind of influence does not happen by accident." Daniel considered the comment for a moment before answering. "Influence is rarely about control," he replied calmly. "It is usually about timing and trust." Jason gave a thoughtful nod. Trust can be complicated. His eyes flicked briefly toward Emily again, especially when people change directions unexpectedly. Emily recognized the meaning behind that sentence immediately. Jason was not really talking about business. He was referring to her. For years he had believed he understood exactly where she fit into his world. Tonight that certainty had begun to fracture. She lifted her chin slightly and met his gaze. "People are allowed to grow, Jason." Her voice remained calm but firm, even when that growth surprises someone else. Jason studied her carefully, clearly evaluating the quiet confidence in her tone. 2 years earlier, she would have avoided challenging him in a conversation like this. Now she spoke with a steadiness that forced him to reconsider the version of Emily Carter he believed he knew. Daniel noticed the exchange with interest. The change in Emily's posture was subtle but unmistakable. The nervous tension that had driven her across the ballroom earlier had slowly transformed into something far more grounded. Jason slipped one hand from his pocket and rested it lightly on the terrace railing. "I suppose surprises are part of living in a city like New York," he said after a moment. "You never know when two worlds might suddenly intersect." Daniel followed his gaze toward the skyline before replying. "Sometimes those intersections reveal something useful." Jason's expression sharpened slightly. "Useful for whom?" Daniel looked at him directly now, his calm voice carrying quiet certainty. "For anyone willing to see the moment clearly." The statement settled between them with the same steady confidence Daniel had carried all evening. Jason held his gaze for a second longer before letting out a slow breath. The lights from the passing cars below glimmered faintly across the glass surface of the railing. "Well," Jason said finally, "I can see that tonight has created a situation worth understanding." He straightened his jacket slightly before adding, "And I have always believed that understanding begins with asking the right questions." Emily sensed the shift in his tone immediately. Jason Carter was no longer simply observing the situation. He was preparing to investigate it. And this time he was no longer certain he would control the answer. Jason Carter's words settled into the quiet space between them, carried lightly by the cool breeze moving across the terrace. Emily Carter recognized the familiar shift in his tone immediately. During their marriage, Jason had always approached problems with the same methodical patience. He would not rush. He would observe, gather information, and slowly guide a conversation until it revealed exactly what he wanted to know. Tonight he was doing the same thing. The difference was that the situation no longer belonged entirely to him. Daniel Brooks remained beside Emily with the same calm steadiness that had defined him since the beginning of the evening. He watched Jason with quiet attention, not defensive and not confrontational, simply aware. That calm presence altered the balance of the conversation more than any argument could have. Jason rested both hands on the glass railing now, looking out across the glowing skyline of Manhattan, as if considering the city itself. The lights from the streets below shimmered across the surface of the glass, reflecting faintly in his eyes. "New York has always fascinated me," Jason said thoughtfully. "It is a city built on connections. Finance, technology, real estate. Entire industries overlap until eventually everyone finds themselves connected to someone else." Daniel followed his gaze toward the distant towers. "That is one way to describe it." Jason nodded slowly. which is why unexpected meetings can sometimes become very important. His eyes shifted back toward Emily and Daniel. For example, the moment that happened inside the ballroom earlier. Emily remained silent for a moment, studying the careful way Jason framed his observation. He was not accusing anyone of anything. He was simply laying out a narrative he hoped to understand. "You mean when I ran across the room and hugged a stranger?" she said calmly. Jason's mouth curved slightly. "That would be the moment." Daniel spoke before Jason could continue. "Emily asked for help. I offered it." The simplicity of that explanation seemed to frustrate Jason slightly. Emily could see the tension flicker briefly behind his otherwise controlled expression. "Yes," Jason said slowly. "That part was very clear." He looked directly at Daniel now, his tone still polite but sharpened by curiosity. "What is less clear is why someone in your position would choose to become involved in something so personal." Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because sometimes people deserve support even when the situation is inconvenient." Jason considered that for a moment, his gaze steady. "That sounds admirable," he admitted. "Though I suspect there is more to the story." Emily felt the conversation turning towards something deeper now, something that Jason had been quietly searching for since he stepped onto the terrace. For years he had believed that every interaction had a motive hidden beneath the surface. That belief had guided nearly every decision in his career. Daniel seemed to understand that as well. "You believe every action must serve a strategy," Daniel said calmly. Jason gave a small nod. "In business, that is usually true." Daniel's expression remained thoughtful. Life does not always follow the same rules. For the first time, Jason's confidence wavered slightly. Emily noticed it in the brief pause that followed, the moment where his usual certainty hesitated. He studied both of them again, as if reevaluating the situation entirely. The music drifting from the ballroom grew slightly louder as another set began inside, the elegant rhythm echoing faintly. Across the terrace, Jason straightened slowly, adjusting his jacket once more. "Well," he said carefully, "if tonight has taught me anything, it is that I may have underestimated how quickly circumstances can change." Emily met his gaze calmly. For the first time since their divorce, Jason Carter was beginning to realize that the version of Emily he believed he understood no longer existed. Jason Carter's realization lingered in the air after his last words, and for the first time that evening he seemed to be standing in unfamiliar territory. Emily Carter watched him quietly, noticing the subtle shift in his posture. It was not defeat, and it was not anger. It was something far more unusual for Jason. Uncertainty. The Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly behind them, thousands of lights glowing like silent witnesses across the dark horizon. Daniel Brooks rested his hands lightly on the terrace railing, the city reflecting in the glass beside him. He did not rush the silence. That patience, Emily realized, was another reason the moment felt different. Jason had always thrived in environments where people reacted quickly, where conversations could be steered by pressure and timing. Daniel didn't either. Instead, he waited, allowing the moment to unfold on its own terms. Jason exhaled slowly and glanced once more toward the ballroom doors where guests continued to move through the elegant space inside. The music drifted outward again, smooth and distant. "It seems I have misread the situation tonight," Jason said finally, his tone thoughtful rather than defensive. Emily studied him carefully. In the past, statements like that from Jason usually carried an unspoken second meaning. Tonight, however, his words felt almost genuine. "Situations change," she replied calmly. Jason nodded once, accepting the answer. His attention shifted briefly to Daniel again. "Mr. Brooks," he said with polite professionalism, "I appreciate your honesty this evening. Not everyone in this city would have handled the moment with the same level of discretion." Daniel gave a small, calm nod. "I believe people deserve dignity when they find themselves in uncomfortable situations." Jason seemed to consider that idea carefully. "Dignity," he repeated quietly, as if the word carried more meaning than he expected. Emily noticed the way he glanced toward her again, but this time there was less calculation in his eyes. It was as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years, no longer through the narrow expectations that had defined their marriage. "You seem confident tonight," Jason said after a moment. The observation surprised Emily slightly. During their marriage, Jason had often pointed out her hesitation or her caution. Confidence had never been the word he chose. She allowed herself a small breath before answering. I spent a long time learning who I was without your expectations guiding every decision. Jason absorbed that quietly. The city wind moved lightly across the terrace again, carrying the distant sounds of traffic far below. Daniel watched the exchange with quiet interest, but did not interrupt. Jason finally straightened his jacket and stepped back slightly from the railing. Well, he said calmly, I should return to the ballroom before my fiancé begins to wonder if I disappeared entirely. Emily nodded politely. Jason paused for a moment longer, his gaze shifting between her and Daniel one last time. Unexpected evenings have a way of revealing things, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes they reveal more than we planned. With that, he turned and walked back toward the glass doors leading into the bright ballroom. Emily watched him disappear inside before letting out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. For the first time since the beginning of the evening, the terrace felt truly quiet again. Daniel glanced at her with a calm expression. Are you all right? Emily looked out across the glowing city and allowed herself a small, peaceful smile. Yes, she said softly. I think for the first time in a long time. I really am.